Hi, my name's Shibler. 1994, pretty good year for music, I'd say. Bit of a random observation? Sure. But I collect vinyl records, and when you collect vinyl records, you might pay attention to album anniversaries, because when an album celebrates a 10-year anniversary or 20 or 30, that usually means a reissue or an expanded edition or something like that, right? And this year I've noticed a lot of albums that I really love celebrating significant anniversaries, particularly 30th anniversaries. So much so to the point where this week I decided to look it up because I keep seeing all these albums celebrating 30th anniversaries, and I've just been thinking like, wow, it must have been a pretty crazy time to be a music listener in 1994. I don't know, I wasn't there. And I mean, yeah, after a quick Google search, you really don't have to look that deep to see it was a pretty crazy time for album releases across the board, across all most major popular music genres at the time. There was just so much going on. So, is 1994 the best year for music ever? I don't know. I'm not seriously trying to answer that question in this video. I just thought it would be a good question to ask in the title, I suppose. I think there's a case to be made for the records I'm gonna show you and talk about, but I kind of just wanted to talk about records that I love that are turning 30 this year, just because I noticed that there was a lot of them, and just talk about, I'll also talk about records that I don't really love, but were very important, that came out during the year. Yeah. So what I did this morning was I just went through my record collection and picked out all the albums that came out in 1994, and then I'm just gonna talk about them, and then from there, I've got some ideas of jumping off points and segues, how to get from these records to records that aren't in my collection but I want to talk about. I didn't put together like a list of albums that I wanted to talk about beyond just grabbing the stuff that I already own that came out in 94. But I'm pretty good with dates of when things came out, so this is just off the dome. I'm just gonna talk about some records that I like. Okay, cool. There we are. Let's get started. I think an appropriate place to start is with the first album that I guess I noticed was turning 30 this year. Ween's Chocolate and Cheese, the fourth mainline album by my favourite band of all time. I mean, I was really excited about this album this year because the band announced that it was getting a big 30th anniversary expanded edition with demos and unreleased tracks. They released a single in lead up to that called Junkie Boy, which I thought was just fantastic and could have made it onto the actual album. So I was really celebrating this album turning 30, and yeah, it's one of my favorite albums by one of my favorite bands. It's absolutely it's one of the most insane albums you'll ever hear. I'm not going to give you the whole rundown on Ween if you don't know who they are, because this video would be way too long because I probably wouldn't stop talking. But in short, they're an experimental rock duo from New Hope, Pennsylvania. You probably know the song Ocean Man. That's the only song by them that is pretty well known, I guess. They're known for being one of, if not the most eclectic band of all time. Every single Ween album, the kind of the fun in it is that there's absolutely no cohesion from track to track. You'll be listening to a punk song, and then you'll go into a soul song, and then there'll be like a psychedelic guitar jam, and then it's like a folk song. The only consistency in their records is that there's no consistency, and I think this is the best introduction to Ween as a band, even though most people listen to their album The Mollusk first, which is where the song Ocean Man comes from. But I think this is the best introduction you can have to the band, and to ease you into, well, I say ease you in, it kind of throws you in the deep end anyway, but to get used to what they do and how their records play out. There's a Philly soul song on here. There's a 7-minute Spanish Western twinge, like revenge ballad. There's country songs. There's twisted, disturbing carnival rock. It's really like just anything and everything on one album. And it's just a masterpiece, and it's just fucking fantastic. And it's just a completely individual album, even in their discography. It's not my personal favourite, but it's absolutely a wonderful album. Listen to Chocolate and Cheese. I think I'll continue down this path of indie rock and alternative rock, because that's what my main interest is from this year, and also the decade as a whole. There's so many great alternative rock bands and indie rock bands and slacker rock, which we'll get to in a minute. But another great album that was one of the ones that tipped me off to the fact this year at some point that 1994, there was something in the air at that time, because Weezer are currently touring the States, I think, for like celebrating the 30th anniversary of this album. Now, listen, Weezer, haha, funny, fucking, look at them, the funny album cover, whatever, right? But at the end of the day, no matter what you think about Weezer, I don't think anybody can really deny that this is a great alternative rock and power pop album. I would argue one of the best, at least of the 90s. I mean, I would say is one of the best power pop records of all time. I think this is an absolutely perfect album, to be so honest. It's catchy, it's fun, it's got a perfect balance of geekiness and humour, but also this album's got a big heart that's kind of gushing all over the place on tracks like Say It Ain't So, and obviously Only in Dreams, which is an incredibly climactic closer, one of the most climactic album closers of this decade. Right, now I get to talk about some records that come from one of my favourite subgenres of indie rock music, or just rock music in general, that was absolutely exploding in 1994. Crooked Rain by Pavement, which is one of the best and I suppose most essential slacker rock albums of all time. Pavement are a very popular band these days. I think they've had some songs do numbers on TikTok or whatever. It surprises me, not that those songs in particular have done well, because they do have, you know, a good handful of very accessible poppy singles, but for the most part, I really don't think that they're that accessible of a band to warrant their global popularity. But I say that while holding the album that has the most pop appeal of any of their albums. I mean, Cut Your Hairs on this thing, Range Life, Gold Sounds, you know, undeniably catchy songs. But in spite of its poppy moments, it can still be just as off-kilter and strange and sloppy and unfinished sounding and as unpredictable as Slanted and Enchanted, the first album, which generally seems to get a lot more love thrown towards it, which I don't entirely understand. I kind of see this album as an improvement on that in every way. I think the closing track, Film or Jive, I did just say Only in Dreams was one of the most climactic closers from the 90s, but I think even this song is that it could be the one. I think it was one of my favourite closing tracks on any album. Built to Spill, There's Nothing Wrong with Love. Kind of similar to that Pavement album in a way, very similar actually, in that it's you know, the production's very dry and the performances are like kind of charmingly sloppy. It's very raw, but unlike the Pavement album, which can be very harsh and abrasive at times, which isn't a bad thing, it just makes it different from this album. But this album is just lovely and warm and sweet all the way through. This has to be the nicest, sweetest rock album that came out in the year 1994. But not in a way that it doesn't have any bite. It's not like a super mellow record. It's fun and it's energetic, and it's just got, you know, it's got really catchy pop songs like the Pavement album, but it's also just got a lot of really, really sweet songs on here. I love this album. I really, really love this album. Wandering further down the slacker rock path once again, we've got probably the defining album of this subgenre of indie rock, Guided by Voices, B1000. This album does have a lot less in common with the Built to Spill album and the Pavement album than those two albums have with each other, if that makes sense. It's way more lo-fi, it's much more sketch-like, but it is still really catchy in its own way, and the songwriting is incredibly compelling, which is it's very surprising, I suppose, considering that most of the songs are between like 45 seconds and a minute 30. I think it's about 35 minutes in length, and it's got 20 tracks on it roughly. So, you know, there's a lot crammed into this thing. But I honestly think that B1000 is one of the best indie rock albums. I'd even drop the indie. I just say this is one of the best rock albums, one of the best guitar-based albums ever made. And I know that's a huge claim, but I think it in its own way really captures like the essence of what rock music is, and not in the way that a purist would define rock music, I guess. You know, it's not bluesy, it's not that kind of, you know, it's not rock and roll, but you know, it's raw, it's sloppy, it's scuzzy, it's kind of dirty, and there's kind of like a grossness about some of this stuff. But it just all comes together in just the best way. To be honest, I think I can say confidently that this is my favourite album that came out in 1994. It's one of my favourite albums ever. I mean, I think in terms of influential albums as a whole, not talking about artists whose bodies of work influence, or bands whose bodies of work influence me as a musician, or particular tracks, but just like whole albums, specific albums. I think this is more influential to the music that I make than any other album. The way it's kind of structured, the way the songs are written, the way the songs are structured, the production, the kind of, you know, the sparseness of it, the roughness of it, everything about this album. I just listen to it and I just think that I want to create things that sound like this, or similar to this, and evoke a similar sort of, you know, feeling in me. I don't know. I'm rambling a bit, but I absolutely love B1000. This is a absolutely perfect record. Those are all the alternative rock and indie rock albums that I own physically, and that I pulled off my shelf this morning. But there was so much that came out in '94. Silver Jews put out their debut album, Starlight Walker, which isn't a favourite of mine, but it's a very important debut because their next album, Natural Bridge, and the album after that, American Water, are absolutely fantastic. So it's a very important debut there. Superchunk put out an album in '94. I can't quite remember the name of it right now, but I think it's called Like a Fool, or maybe that's the title of the opening track, but that's a fantastic power pop album. Beck put out 2 albums in '94, debuted with Mellow Gold, which is an essential piece of American indie music from the time, and obviously has the track Loser from it, which is, you know, that's, what a song, right? And he also followed that up with another album the same year, which is a bit more my cup of tea. It's a bit more acoustic, you know, little bit more mellow, less abrasive than Mellow Gold can be. But I mean, 2 really good Beck albums from '94. I've only got one more record to physically show you here, but this is going to take us over the pond, as Americans say, I guess. But before I started talking about what was going on in England in '94, I suppose I should just briefly mention, while I've been talking about American alternative rock music, what was actually popular at the time, because it wasn't this stuff that I've been talking about. It was grunge, right? Now, personally, I don't give a fuck about grunge. I hate grunge, most of it. I don't mind Nirvana, because obviously they're seen as particularly good, and even as somebody who doesn't like grunge at all, I could recognise that Nirvana are a good band. And in 1994, Nirvana put out that MTV Unplugged live album, which is a very, very iconic live album, and I'd imagine it, amongst people my age, is probably one of the most well-remembered albums from that year. And it's not even a studio album, which, you know, that's definitely it says something about the staying power of Nirvana. I also kept seeing this one Soundgarden album pop up when I was looking up what albums came out in '94. I can't remember the name of it. I haven't heard it. I think it was the album that Black Hole Sun comes from, and I used to listen to that song when I was walking to school when I was like 13 or 14 because I hated school, and I think that's what grunge is to me, is just music for like kids in their mid-teens who hate school. But I digress. If it was the album that song was from, cool. If it wasn't, I don't know. Right, moving on from grunge. That's what was happening in America. In England, it was all Britpop. Blur, Parklife. It's Parklife, isn't it? It's a good album. I love Blur. This isn't my favourite Blur album. This isn't even my favourite Blur Britpop album, but I mean, this was pretty defining for that genre. It's an album that kind of gets a bad rap, I think, from younger generations, because Parklife is obviously the biggest song from this album, and I think I see people all the time, particularly people who try to make the claim that Oasis are better than Blur, just like who've only heard Parklife and maybe Girls and Boys, kind of like fun, silly, low stakes songs, right? And use those songs to, dismiss Blur as just this kind of novelty band. But I mean, you literally just have to listen to the rest of this album. It's so good. To the End is such a climactic, uplifting love song. Tracy Jacks is one of the best commentaries on middle class life in Britain that the band ever made. I mean, it's Parklife, Like I said, it's not my favourite Blur album. I even think Modern Life is rubbish. It is a better album than this, personally. But, And I mean, it wasn't just Blur. All of the major Britpop bands put out an album in '94. I can't ignore the fact that Oasis debuted this year. I have to mention it if I'm talking about this year in particular, even though I personally don't care about Oasis. I think that album's alright, definitely, maybe. Got to Live Forever on it. It's a good track. Slide Away is a great track. Married with Children, there's some good tracks in there, but I don't personally care about Oasis. I'm much more enthusiastic about Dogman Star by Suede, which is probably the furthest that I'm aware of that any band really pushed the Britpop sound, because I mean, you kind of associate Britpop with Parklife, right? It's upbeat and it's bright and it's snarky and it's cheeky, and on the wrong day it can definitely rub you up the wrong way. But Dogman Star by Suede is definitely the darkest Britpop album that I've heard. It doesn't really resemble, I imagine, what most people have heard if they've only heard the genre in passing, literally just like, through Blur and Oasis. And to be fair, on paper that doesn't really sound appealing to me, so I don't expect that to sound appealing to other people. I kind of like dark, a bit more self-serious, mature Britpop album. It sounds a bit like bit counterintuitive, I guess, but it is. It's a fantastic album. Finding out that this album was turning 30 this year was actually the final nail in the coffin for me to make this video. I walked into a record shop earlier this week and I saw it on like the new releases shelf, like a big anniversary edition. And that was when I went home and I like looked up what else came out that year, because, I was just like, so many great albums, and that being one of them. It's Dogman Star is such a fantastic album. Now, I said I didn't have any more records to show you, and that much is true, but I do have one CD to show you. This is Massive Attack's second album, Protection, which is going to help bring me on to something else that was happening in England at the time. Not Britpop related, trip hop. The two major trip hop releases from '94. As far as I'm aware, I'm sure might be something else that I'm forgetting. But this one, and more importantly than this one, I'd definitely say Dummy by Portishead, which is, generally considered to be the best album that ever came out of the genre. I don't have a great deal to say about either of these albums or trip hop as a whole, but it's definitely important to mention. And that's not because I don't like trip hop, by the way. I absolutely do. I really like Massive Attack. I think this album's great. I think the first one is better, but I think this one is better than the Mezzanine. And obviously, you know, Dummy is such a classic album. I don't have anything I feel like can even add to that discussion, really. I've kind of run out of segues now. I don't have such a clear way to get from one point to the next. I guess I need to get to hip hop, so it makes the most sense to go from trip hop. Ready to Die by the Notorious B.I.G. and Illmatic by Nas. Two of the most important debut albums in all of hip hop history. Just two bona fide classic albums that I have absolutely nothing to say about. Like with Dummy, you know, there's nothing that I feel like I can add to this conversation, especially as a white 20-year-old Welshman. But I'm just reminding you, because I have to if I'm making a video about 1994, that they're great. Also, Outkast debuted this year. I'm not going to even attempt to say the name of that album, but, you know, definitely not as important or impactful as those other two albums that I just spoke about. But it is definitely an important debut, if not just for the fact that, you know, it gave Andre 3000 and Big Boy a platform to go on to make all the other amazing records that they would go on to make. At this point, I'm kind of just like racking my brain now for just names to pop up that don't really fit into any nice little neat boxes for me to talk about in like genre or scene or whatever. I will say that I don't, the only genre of music that I'm completely unacquainted with is metal. I don't listen to it, so you know, if I've missed out any, you know, really important metal records from this year, I wouldn't know, sorry. Selected Ambient Works 2 by Aphex Twin. You know, one of the best ambient albums ever made. Probably the most, you know, the most talked about, the most discussed, the most remembered, besides Brian Eno's Music for Airports. Music for the Jilted Generation, The Prodigy, my personal favourite Prodigy album for sure. Grace by Jeff Buckley, there's you know, a handful of songs from that album. Like I was talking about with Pavement, that's sort of taken on a new life in the internet age amongst young people. So, you know, definitely have to mention that. Elliott Smith debuted with Roman Candle. You know, another important debut there. Let me think. Dookie by Green Day. So that's a pretty big one I've missed, actually. You know, the pop punk album, really. I suppose what are the, thinking along the lines of like punk, what are the Jawbreaker 24-hour revenge therapy, that's what it's called. Jawbreaker are a band that a friend of mine put me onto toward the end of last year, but I only heard that album start of this year. Great album, really great punk kind of power pop emo sort of stuff. It's a brilliant album. And Steve Albini produced it, and Steve Albini with his band Shellac, also put out At Action Park, which is fantastic underground noise rock record. Noise rock, speaking of noise rock, Nine Inch Nails, The Downward Spiral, that was definitely one of the biggest albums that came out in '94. Yeah, man. I mean that's what I got. I mean, like I said at the beginning of this video, I'm not actually trying to make a sort of comprehensive claim as to why 1994 is the best year for music that ever happened. Just literally an observation that I've been making throughout the year as it's been going along, noticing albums that are turning 30, and just a lot of really, really great ones. You know, not necessarily trying to make the claim that 1994 was the most important year for music, but yeah, I mean, just notice that there were a ton of fucking great albums that came out 30 years ago this year. Yeah, that's what I got, really. Just wanted to talk about some cool records. Yeah, that's me. Bye.